A very good evening and welcome to one and all present here for the international webinar series on FAIR Framework for Digital Health. I'm Dr. Ramya, part of Dental Education Unit and Senior Lecturer at Sri Balaji Dental College and Hospital. Will be highlighting you about this program today. I would like to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Srinivasan Ramachandran, who is a senior scientist in the bioengineering field at University of California. I would also welcome our chairperson, Dr. Srinisha ma'am, Registrar Dr. Bhuminathan sir, Principal Dr. Jimson sir, and Dr. Sumati Jones ma'am, Head of the Department of Pharmacology at Sri Balaji Dental College and Hospital. Over to Sumati ma'am to share a few words on today's webinar.
Good evening. Welcome to DENTOPHARM webinar series. Today we have Dr. Srinivasan Ramachandran sir with us, his good friend of Dr. Jones. He is well versed in medicine as well as engineering. Today's topic will be on digital healthcare. So we all know that digital healthcare plays a crucial role in recent, and there are recent advances in digital healthcare division. Implementation of this, which includes artificial intelligence, blockchain, all these will be beneficial to public and improvise the healthcare system. But then we'll have to know about safety, efficacy, reliability, and so on. Sir will be the right person to explain about all these. Over to Ramya about sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I warmly welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Srinivasan Ramachandran, sir, Senior Research Analyst in the Department of Bioengineering at University of California. His expertise in multiple disciplines, including medicine, biomedical engineering, cell molecular and systems biology, and medical informatics. He obtained his MBBS from Stanley Medical College, Madras, and MTech in biomedical engineering from IIT Bombay, and also his PhD in biomedical engineering from IIT Madras. Later, he moved to United States for his postdoc in neuroscience at University of California at Santa Barbara. He has published more than 60 high-profile research publications in the last 2 decades with 3,000 plus citations and H index of 31 and I index of 44. And he's also co-author of 4 patents. In addition, he has made several original pioneering contributions to biomedical imaging technologies development, neurodegenerative disorders, targeted drug delivery, and systems biology field. He is consultant to Comet Technologies, Sanjos in atmospheric plasma and E-beam applications in semiconductor fabrications. At present, Dr. Ramachandran directs a FAIR framework for next generations metabolomics workbench for enhancement of National Institute of Health. He has devised a minimal clinical metadata schema, encapsulated a FHIR data model with metadata encoded with standard clinical ontologies, including SNOMED CT and LOINC. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ramya and Dr. Jones, for your kind words and introduction. And I'm delighted to be here and be part of your webinar series. Hello, everyone. Good evening to everyone. Today I will talk about a FAIR framework for digital health and share some of our recent experience in this field. So before diving into the details, I would like to give an overview about the talk so that we have some kind of a positioning system where we are in this presentation. You don't get lost into these details. So the first 10 minutes, I will talk about what is digital health, what it can deliver, its potentials, and where are we now at the current stage, and what are the challenges, why we cannot realize the full potential of it. And then the next 10 minutes, I'll talk about what is a FAIR data and the FAIR framework. Those are the ingredients to achieve the digital health. And then I will share about our recent experiences in this area. And I will provide an overview summary of today's talk so that you have some take-home message and some implementation details. So the impact of information technology on our civilization is profound in all levels, and the pace is incredible when compared to all other industrial revolutions. For example, the 1780 is marked by the era of mechanical production. So we switched from manual production to mechanical production with the power of steam engines, locomotives, transportation, and things like that. And then roughly after 100 years later, we switched from mechanical production to mass production with the help of the electric power. And this was revolutionized by, again, the AC electric systems. And then roughly about 100 years later, in 1970, the third industrial revolution was through from mass production to automated production with the help of microcontrollers, computer systems, and etc. And then from since 2000 onwards, this is the fourth industrial revolution, which is mainly through the data. And this is where the information technology has come into play a very big role compared to all other three revolutions. It would be an understatement to say that no aspect of our life is untouched with information technology. For example, we all can relate to a common experience. 30 years back, when you want to find a literature, if you want to find a literature, you typically go read your paper and then go to the reference section, note down those references that you are interested in. You walk physically into a library and then go to the backlog section and go through the index cards, locate your journal, and then put a request for your articles of interest. But now this has been completely transformed with the help of powerful search engines like Google, and also some dedicated search engines like Semantic, Scholar, or ISI Web, and things like that, where you could input a keyword or you could use a DOI, digital object identifier, to retrieve the articles of interest from the comfort of your home or within your mobile device. And then if it is behind a firewall, you could you can complete the transaction within the same session, and then you get your literature. And we could relate several other examples like booking your train ticket or flight ticket and things like that. So the no area of life where information is more critical than in health and disease for obvious reasons. Every transaction that we carry out in clinical care, it's all based on data. We examine the patient, we document it. We also look into the diagnostic report, and then we come to a conclusion. Diagnosis, and then we start treating the patient. So information is there, and the information technology in the healthcare industry has literally revolutionized the way we carry out or show the clinical care. So for a moment, let's assume that we have the best health information system possible in the world that can answer all of your questions. Let's see what is it. It's a hypothetical situation, and let's see what it can deliver to us with such a system. So for an individual, that hypothetical system can give about the predictive analytics. What is predictive analytics? So let's say if the system has a complete health history, then it can look at my health clinical profile, and it knows about my current symptoms, signs examined by the physician, and then it also knows my family history, my personal history, and things like that. And then it can give you proactively what are the preventive measures, what are the symptoms I have to watch for a particular disease, or what are the preventive measures by changing my lifestyle or dietary patterns, etc., etc. For example, let's say if I have a strong family history of diabetes, I'm relatively young, I'm not developed the disease yet. So the system can look at my family history and my current symptoms, and it can tell me what are the symptoms to look for in case, or suggest the screening diagnostics to watch out for diabetes. And also it knows my health profile. It can suggest me dietary recommendations as well as lifestyle modifications necessary to prevent diabetes in the first place. If I already have diabetes, for example, then it can suggest me how to prevent the secondary complications by monitoring my symptoms, my health profile. It can tell how to prevent diabetic retinopathy or nephropathy and things like that. This is about predictive analytics. The second important concept, a very recent concept, is precision medicine, which is otherwise known as personalized medicine, where the health system, information system, can integrate my health profile, my clinical profile, as well as my genotype, and also it can integrate the omic analysis like transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and pharmacogenomics, and so on. And this big data can be fed into machine learning systems and artificial intelligence systems. Then they can recommend which drug might be really helpful for my condition. Let's say if I have a particular stage 4 cancer or something, there are so many medications available. But looking at my genotype and also how I respond to particular perturbations, the system can predict I may be a good candidate for a particular medication over another regime and things like that. So that is about the precision medicine, which is a very powerful concept, which is taking roots now at the current times. And what is that for a physician or a healthcare professional? So it can provide decision support. We all witnessed during this COVID pandemic, the decision support system played a key role in triaging the patients given their health condition, the symptoms, and it triaged the patients automatically. So who gets what, and so the decision support systems that we can think of. And also, it is an era of wireless integrated microsystems. We are all hooked up with so many gadgets these days. If you have a smartwatch, which can monitor your heart rate and rhythm. If you're, let's say, if you're having ventricular tachycardia, fibrillation, things like that, your ECG reader can pick up. It can continuously monitor and can detect these events and can relay it to your physician, and physician will be alerted, and then he can contact you or institute right up treatment at the appropriate time. And for a population, it can do the population analytics. For example, if it is a governmental agency, the government may be interested to know, the health department may be interested to know what are the top 10 diseases within the community so that they can allocate resources accordingly. So there is something for the population analytics and for the government policy agencies. Globally, we can also have this array of medical IoT, Internet of Things, and also the wireless integrated microsystems, which can constantly monitor for the radioactive or chemical outbreaks. It can also monitor pandemics or even natural disasters like tsunami and things like that. And that can do early warning for epidemic or pandemic outbreak surveillance, nuclear and chemical disasters, and natural disasters. Now, if you have a system that can continuously integrate and harmonize information, that can integrate from clinical all the way to biomedical, government, and commercial entities, we can be best prepared for an emergency response. So this is another projection by Eric Topol. He's one of the pioneers of the personalized medicine or the precision medicine they call these days. So that is his vision about digital health. So we have all these accelerating digital technologies like the mobile phones, computer systems, and the high throughput technologies and the ubiquitous network. They're all converging onto health, resulting in an exponential possibilities in disease diagnosis, management, prediction, and prevention. This is another visualization of the digital health. Now, the big question is, what is the current status of digital health? This all sounds great on paper, and where are we now? So the answer is we have some parts of the system developed. For example, we have array of sensors that can monitor our health metrics. We have array of sensors that can monitor epidemic outbreaks or people movement or radioactive outfall and things like that. We also have a communication system like terrestrial communication, wireless, satellite communication, and things like that. We also have the electronic health records, which is the information pipeline for clinical data, and also high throughput assays and computing systems and algorithms, etc. But what is lacking? What is preventing us realizing the full potential of digital health? So among the multitude of factors, the first and foremost is the lack of a shared understanding of the concept of digital health. So what it means? Unless we have a common understanding about a particular concept so that we can have a meaningful conversation, the very definition of digital health is very elusive. And if, for example, if you ask 10 people about the notion of digital health, you will get 15 answers. You won't be surprised if you get even more. So This word digital health is an umbrella term which is used vaguely and interchangeably with several different concepts depending upon the practitioner. Some people talk about mobile health. Some people think about electronic health. Some people think about telehealth. It should be patient-centric delivery care, etc., etc. So this lack of precise and accurate definition is a major barrier for advancing digital health, especially when you approach the governmental agencies for funding and things like that. The policymakers would like to know what exactly is digital health so that they have an objective or a reference point, what we are talking about, what it can deliver, so that they can measure the outputs and things like that. So here is one example of the different notions of digital health. So these authors, they poured over all the evidences that is available in the last 4 decades, 4 to 5 decades, and they created this network graph, network density plot. They looked at all the concepts of digital health and what did they mean. So you can see here, there's so many different notions of it. Majority of them is all about health, but again, within the health, some people talk about technology, digital technology, and use of information technology, healthcare, patient-centric healthcare, mobile health, e-health, etc., and etc. So this lack of the precise and accurate definition was a big barrier in getting funding and things like that. So at this time, HIMSS, which is Healthcare Management and Systems Society, which is a global non-profit organization, which helps in defining the terms like interoperability, digital health, and things like that. It's a large body of professionals. It carry about 100,000 licensed professionals in this society. And Dr. Snowden and Snowden take a look at what are the major dominant themes of digital health definition. So there are three major themes. One is the type and use of technology, and for that, WHO came up with a definition of digital health. It's an umbrella term encompassing e-health as well as emerging areas such as the advanced computer sciences and big data and genomics and AI. The second dominant theme is the healthcare delivery, and Deloitte is a reputed management consultant group, and they come up with all about delivery care and its capacity, improve the healthcare system performance and capacity to deliver care, treat patients' diseases, and monitor public health. The last one is about the health system transformation. It's a revolution that enables medicine to transform from reactive and often empirical discipline into a precise, preventive, personalized, and participating endeavor. So this definition, again, there are three competing themes, and the HIMSS finally came up with a definition that encompasses all the three themes, and they put the patient at the center at the core of this entire theme, which connects and empowers people and population in a digitally enabled care environment. The innermost core is the people and the population, which are surrounded by digitally enabled care environment, which leverages on the digital tools, technologies, and services to transform the healthcare delivery. So this definition is a very holistic, and it incorporates all three major elements into one single definition, which is a major breakthrough in approaching NIH and NSF so that we can get funding for digital health. So the same group came up with a hierarchy of layers. What are the different layers that is required to deliver healthcare? So this is the framework. So the bottommost level is the interoperable data. On top of that, it will be learning systems, and then you can build governance on top of it, and then healthcare delivery, and then finally it will reach the delivery to the people and population wellness. So this is the digital health framework that HIMSS came up with, and which has been widely accepted and adopted. So where is the issue? Where is the challenge? That's a question. That's a burning question in realizing the digital health. So we saw components of the digital health has already been developed, like the sensors, information system, technology, etc. But what is lacking is this fundamental limiting thing, that is interoperable data. I'll talk about what is interoperable data in a moment. So the interoperable data is a foundation for digital health. The lack of it prevents achieving the full potential of it. So why do we need interoperability? We'll take a one step back before going into the FAIR and things like that. So what is the need? What is the requirement for interoperability? So in the last 2 decades in the biomedical research domain, there has been tremendous developments in high throughput technologies, like the next generation sequencing technologies that cracked up DNA sequencing, RNA sequencing, proteomics, metabolomics, and so many other things. Mass spectrometry, high content screening. All these high throughput technologies resulted in delivered huge amounts of big data. And big data in the sense the wide variety of data and the velocity of data that's coming up. So it's big data. And this big data required big data analytics, which required high performance computing systems, databases like Hadoop and MongoDB, which is schemaless databases. And also it required software, sophisticated analytics algorithms and things like that, so that we can have an integrated view about health and disease. At the same time, parallelly, in the clinical research also, there has been a constant push to publicly deposit all the clinical trial outputs from academia, from the industry, and finally all the clinical trials, irrespective of their outcome, are made public. That also resulted in a very data-rich data warehouse. Recently, in the healthcare delivery, we adopted the healthcare IT systems, the electronic health records. They also provide, data-rich, data, which can be. So the people started visualizing a grand knowledge base where healthcare data, clinical research data, as well as biomedical research data, they all can interoperate. They can, talk to each other and evolve continuously, so that we can deliver what is called as a digital health, precision medicine, evidence-based medicine, and clinical decision support. For this to happen, we need to have a continuously integrated and harmonized and shared data across all these 3 domains: biomedical research domain, clinical research domain, as well as in the healthcare domain. So this is why the interoperability is essential. Right now, they are in data silos. Whatever happens in biomedical research domain, it stays there. And similarly, what happens in clinical research and healthcare, they all stays there. They all remain data silos. There is no interoperability among this data, so that we cannot realize the digital health dreams. Now, what is the requirement for interoperability? This is where the FAIR comes into. FAIR is an acronym for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So every object, data object, I can give an example of same again, the research papers. So now, if you want to find a research paper, it should have some unique identifier. That is where the DOIs comes into, digital object identifier. It's a very unique for every piece of scientific literature published there. And it should have information about accessibility, whether if it is a free or it is being a firewall. There should be information available so that the people can transact the business and get it. And the data you get, it should be interoperable, meaning, So this is the guiding principles of the FAIR. It has all the elements of what is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I'm not going to go into every line, but I have highlighted some of the key concepts here. Findable is every data or metadata results in a global, unique, and persistent identifier describing which metadata so that it can be found. And accessible is information to retrieve, how to retrieve it should be there. And interoperable means a formal, accessible, and shared broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. So this is where the ontologies and knowledge graphs comes into. I'll talk about that in a bit later. And also the vocabularies that follow FAIR principles. And for reusable, the data should be released with a clear and accessible data usage license and meet domain-relevant community standards. In addition to FAIR, in our recent paper, we introduced two other components called veritable and reproducible. These are very essential elements for clinical care. Findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable is okay. That is the minimum thing that you need. But for digital health, we need to add the information that it should be reliable, it should be verifiable, and it should be reproducible by different groups so that it can be actionable in clinical care setting. So in our recent paper, which is yet to be published, it's currently in the preparation. So the FAIR framework, the FAIR requires three things. One is the metadata. You need a metadata to describe what is metadata. It's a data about the data. So you should be able to describe your data with rich metadata. And then it should be encapsulated in a standard data model. So that is why the schema comes into the metadata schema. There has to be encapsulated in data model. So this data model can be interoperable across systems. A good example would be a PDF document format, which is a portable document format. You can, whether you are using Windows, Linux, or Mac, doesn't matter. This model can operate all across these different systems. Similarly, the object should be encapsulated in data model. That's why the FHIR is called the Fast Healthcare Interoperability. That is the standard, de facto standard that is used for interoperability. And then the third component is the ontology encoding. So I'll talk about ontology in a bit. So the metadata element has to be encoded in ontology so that everyone involved in this have the same meaning of what is being talked about. So that is where the ontologist comes into. And this enables semantic interoperability. So metadata enables findability and accessibility information. Data model provides the structural interoperability, and ontology encoding enables the semantic interoperability. And together, they can enable the reusability of the data. This is the FAIR framework that we have proposed and we have implemented in our metabolomics workbench. So without going into the mathematical details about what an ontology, the graph theory, and things like that, ontology is a formal, explicit specification of a shared concept. It may sound fancy, but it's simply when you call what is a circle, you should define what is circle so that everybody in the room knows exactly what we are talking about. So that is what all it is about. But here, beyond that, that is, we are talking about circle is a node. Here you can see it's a graph, social graph. Here we have people, Frank knows both Bill and Sue, and Bill and Sue knows Mark, and Mark is married, Amy is married to Mark, and Sue is married to Bill. So this is just a simple social graph network. Here, Frank, Bill, the people are the nodes, and the arrows or the edges are called relationships. In an ontology graph, the nodes as well as the relationship can have attributes, and they are directed acyclic graph. What it means is we can compute with this relationship. There will be no ambiguity. For example, here, Frank knows Bill, but Bill does not know Frank. It makes sense, right, from this acyclic and directed acyclic graph. And so this form of knowledge representation, I mean, the ontology is essential for knowledge representation as it enables the semantic interoperability. I'm just giving a very high-level view. I'm not going into the details because each of these topics deserve their own presentations, a couple of presentations, in fact. So the ontologies are nothing but the purpose of ontology is to knowledge representation. And once we talk about knowledge representation, we come into the knowledge graphs. The knowledge graph has three things. One, it has got the sources. It acquires and integrates information into an ontology, which is the knowledge base. And then you have an inferencing engine or reasoning engine, which can make judgments based on the given knowledge base. The previous example, the inferencing engine can tell whether Bill knows Frank or Bill knows Amy or not. That can be inferenced with no time. So just to have a recap, for interoperability data, for digital health, we need interoperable data. For interoperability, we need FAIR standards. And for FAIR, we need metadata, ontology, as well as the knowledge graph. So these are the essential elements to achieve interoperable or FAIR data. So this is an example. When you have the FAIR data, which all can interoperate and things, even though they're jumbled, we can put them together into the data can be transformed into knowledge or wisdom if they follow the FAIR standards. So coming back to the digital health framework, so we saw the interoperable data is the essential limiting step that is missing to achieve the digital health. So our recent experience in this, let me break it down some of the terminologies here. So CLOVAC is clinical observations and vocabularies. It is a partnership among three DCCs we call data coordination centers. So three DCCs, metabolomics workbench. This is what I'm affiliated to. We host metabolomics data sets from different diseases. And there is a Kids First. It's a Children's Hospital of Philadelphia where they are interested in developmental birth defects and cancers in the children. And there is another one called SPARK, Stimulating Peripheral Activity Relief Conditions. It's a multi-institutional organization. The PI is from New Zealand here. So we three got together and through NIH, National Institute of Health, and CFDE is a common fund data ecosystem. They provided funding for our three DCCs to come to create a proof of concept interoperable data repositories along these three repositories: Metabolomics Workbench, Kids First, and Spark. That's where we got the funding last year, and we just concluded it successfully, and I will share those details here. So what are we trying to achieve in the CLOVAC? So here is the problem statement. So all three DCCs, the Metabolomics Workbench, Kids First, and Spark, they evolved over different periods of time, with no coordination among them. So when there is no coordination, that means each one had their own or did not have the schema. They had or did not have their ontology encoding, and similarly, they had or they did not have a data model. Even if we are using different models, there is no interoperability. So our goal is to solve this interoperability in a retroactive fashion. How can we make, so NIH has funded so many studies over several decades. It has created, data-rich data model, data warehouses, and we cannot put them to use for actionable intelligence. The whole idea of this is if we can enable interoperability among these different repositories, then they can be put to good use. So the result of this is all three DCCs are remain as a data silos, and because they are not fair. And the CLOVAC goal is to enable fairness and demonstrate interoperability. That is a problem that we are trying to solve. So these are the broad overviews how we achieved the steps for achieving the CLOVAC. First, we need to get, since we did not have any schema or we had our own schema, first we need to get a structural alignment of both the Metabolomics Workbench and Spark. And Kids First. Spark did not have the data repository, but they have the tools like terminology mapping and normalization services and things like that. So we were aligning the common, based on a common metadata schema, we aligned both Metabolomics Workbench and Kids First metadata. Once we aligned it, then the next step is to the values, the metadata values are encoded in different terminologies. For example, in Kids First, they use Mondo or disease ontology or HPO for the phenotypes, whereas in Metabolomics Workbench, we use primarily SNOMED CT. So the second step is we need to align these encodings into a common terminology. So we chose SNOMED CT for it has been the universal medical clinical terminology. That's got a wide traction. It is adopted in more than 90 countries in the world and things like that. And it's got a lot of commercial as well as academic adoption. Then once we have both the structure and the semantics aligned, we ingest them into the FHIR servers. I'll talk about FHIR server in a bit. Through an ETL pipeline, extract, transform, and load pipeline. And we generated the harmonized FHIR profile. To interact with these FHIR profiles, FHIR is basically a REST API, so it will be really boring for somebody who don't have background in computers. If they want a query, it returns a JSON or XML format, which is, people cannot make sense of it. So we came up with the Shiny app that is deployed in a cloud workspace called Cavatica. so that the user can interact with it and query and transact the business. And we demonstrated the fairness via the use cases. I'll talk about the use cases in a bit as well. So this is the metadata schema. In metabolomics workbench, we consider the entire clinical profile as a metadata schema. Why clinical profile? Because most diseases are complex in nature. I mean, it was once upon a time we thought diseases are caused by either infectious agents or by genetic, but we have realized it is much more complex than that. A lot of epigenetic factors also play into role, so we need to capture the entire clinical profile as part of the metadata schema. So the clinical typically has demography, socioeconomic, anthropometry, clinical state, diagnostics, therapeutics, family, and personal history. And these are some of the elements. So each one is called data object. The clinical state is a data object, family is a data object. And within the family history, you can have, this is the data element. And this is the metadata. This is a data element, and the values are encoded in a particular ontology. In our case, we use SNOMED-CT. So the second component of FAIR is we saw metadata. The second one is called data model, and the third one is the ontology. So now I'm talking about the second part, which is the FAIR data model. FAIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, which is a de facto standard for clinical data at the moment. It's open source, and each data object in our clinical profile has a corresponding FAIR resource. What is a FAIR resource? I'll just talk in the next slide. The resources, so you have a FAIR resource. Maybe it's worth looking at FAIR resource at the moment. So for example, this is a FAIR resource, and this is a patient resource. It's nothing but what are all the data elements that are pertinent to a patient. For example, in this case, patient identifier, is it an active document or not, name, telephone, gender, birth date, whether the person is deceased or not, address, marital status, and so on. So it has got a number of elements. We can add elements to it. And if you look at the cardinality, most of them are 0 or 1. What it means is 0 or 1 means they are optional. They are not mandatory. In the entire list, very few are mandatory. For example, you can see what language the patient speaks. That is an important, essential thing that you must record in the FAIR resource. And most of them are, optional. And you don't need to adopt all the elements in your data set. You can, whatever is there, you can use it. That is called profiling. And when you are using the values, so let's say, for example, gender, the code, it is a code. It can be male, female, or other. So this is a value set. When you have predetermined values, applicable values, that is called as a value set. On the other hand, if you have something like a family history, then you can use certain ontologies, which is already developed and out there. So you could use those ontologies and the concepts, codable concept that is where the ontology comes into. So this is about a FAIR resource, and it is available in wide variety of formats. It is, by de facto, it is available in UML, XML, JSON, Turtle, and other formats as well. So profiling is constraining the resource either by encoding, by the data type, and value sets. And that's called as a profiling. You have a generic form, and then you can decide to use what encoding you want to use, then it becomes a profile. You can decide what data types or what value sets are allowed to use, then it becomes a profiling. So this is the just an overview about our entire Cloak proposal. So here is Kavatica, which is a cloud workspace, and we have the Shiny app running on this. And you can fire, not in this, you can ask a question. And we have these two DCCs, Kit First and Metabolomics Workbench. We host our own data sets in the FAIR model. And if you ask a query, it's a REST API, and it goes there and pulls out the relevant records. And now, but since these records are in completely different formats, right? The only common thing is the data model, but it doesn't have the schema, common schema. It doesn't have the common ontologies. So this is where we need to carry out harmonization step. So As I mentioned before, harmonization is done in the form of structural alignment as well as in the semantics and also the data normalization part, which is run by microservices here, which is where the Spark comes into because they have developed the tools for all these harmonization steps. And they provide, and then these profiles are converted into a harmonized meta profile, which is intent can be stored in another file server that can be served out for the user. This is the whole grand picture. The actual system architecture is a little bit different, where the user comes and interacts with it through a Shiny app, deployed in Kavatica, Pfizer Query, and Spark Knowledge Graph. So the knowledge graph here is, there are two knowledge graphs here. One, the metadata schema. You can create axioms. What are the truth conditions? And you can create the axiom as well as you can also create the knowledge graph from the ontologies. And when the user is searching for a particular thing, it can resolve it not by a keyword search, but by semantic search. If time permits, I will talk about semantic search at the end. So once the Spark knowledge graph runs the query and then pass it on to these the 5 servers, the data are pulled and they are visualized in the Kavatica platform. So we demonstrated the interoperability through use cases, and I'm not going to details of every use case. We have a video, but that itself is about 45 minutes, so I'm not going to play the video. I'll just simply, maybe I can illustrate about the semantic search. 15 minutes time. So the first and foremost is a data search, a simple keyword or a semantic search. And the second one is the data discovery, where it is a serendipitous mode, where you come to a repository, you browse it, and then you realize, oh, this particular repository has this data, that data. So that kind of a thing, a serendipitous way of mode of discovery. And we do this through the knowledge graph that Spark developed. And also we can build virtual cohorts. So what is a virtual cohort? Let's say if you have a large data set and you want to break it down based on certain facets which are relevant to the disease. For example, if you're having Alzheimer's disease data set, thousands of patients, but you want to look at family called familial AD or FAD they call, or sporadic one. You can segregate people with family history. You can create a separate cohort, and the rest as a sporadic AD, and then you can start comparing again, across these two groups. I mean, there is so many examples I can give about the virtual cohort building. So either by data subsetting, that's what I just mentioned. You can filter the data sets along the facets that are biologically relevant, like age, gender, family history, smoking, and things like that. And the second concept is virtual cohort building based on data augmentation. Here, we are not subsetting them. We are combining the data sets. There are two types of combining. One, a homogeneous data sets. So what is homogeneous data set? Let's say somebody has done a transcriptomic study on one particular disease, let's say Down syndrome. And another group has done on Down syndrome on a different patient, but has 2 people and here 3 people. You can combine them together. They are both transcriptomic studies. Now you can combine them together to increase the statistical power, which is a powerful thing. I mean, otherwise you need to repeat the whole experiment with a large population and things like that. So this can eliminate those issues. The other one is the heterogeneous data set. This is really, really a powerful concept where you combine 2 orthogonal data sets. For example, there are 2 researchers who have worked on Down syndrome. One is worked on proteomics part, the other one has worked on the metabolomics part or transcriptomic part. Now, the common thing is Down syndrome, but the data sets are completely orthogonal to each other. One is transcriptomic, the other one is metabolomics. Now, by combining these 2, you can have really a comprehensive understanding of the health and disease. You all know the transcriptomics and DNA is not changeable, meaning it does not change over a period of time. It remains static except for the mutations. Whereas the proteomics and metabolomics are highly dynamic, they're time varying. But that is what actually reflects the disease. All the actionable intelligence is happening on the proteomics or the metabolomics part. If you want to start a diabetic medication or stop a diabetic medication, you look for the blood sugar, which is a metabolite, not look at the gene or your susceptibility and things like that. Even though the gene can tell the possible risks or how you may behave for a given particular drug and things like that. But it's actually the proteomics and metabolomics which are actionable in real life. So combining these together, then we can have a very good and comprehensive understanding of the health and disease. That's why the heterogeneous data sets, data augmentation is very essential. So I can illustrate the semantic search example here. So what is a semantic search? So for example, let's assume that we have 3 hypothetical studies. One is a type 1 diabetes, second is a type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And look at how they are mentioned here. Here, type 1 diabetes, type 1 is Arabic numeral. Here, type 2 is a Roman numeral. And they can also, there is a change. Diabetes mellitus type 1, type 2, diabetes mellitus. The order has been changed and things like that. And if you're using, if they're not encoded, if they're not ontologically encoded, in such a repository, if you go and type, diabetes mellitus, it looks for keyword matching. If it doesn't find an exact match, then you may not get the results. Whereas if the repository is ontology encoded, it doesn't matter how you put, it looks at the meaning, underlying meaning, and it can pull the relevant data together. So it is an example, 3 cases. And the question that we want to ask is retrieve all retinal disorders. For this first question, retinal disorder, it looks for, in a regular database, it looks for partial matching, and then it might pull retino. So this is a partial match. It can pull study number 2, only if the partial match is implemented. For the second question, retrieve all metabolic disorders. Again, the partial match, it may pull out study number 3. But if you ask the last question, retrieve all subjects on HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor, we will not find even a single study. But all the medications, atorvastatin, simvastatin, fluvastatin, they're all HMG-CoA reductases. If the database or if the metadata is encoded in ontology, it does not matter. We will pull for retinal disorders, it will pull both study 2 and 3. For metabolic disorders, it will pull all 3 cases because all of them are metabolic disorders. And similarly, for the last question, it will pull all 3 because all of them are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. So the reason why it is able to pull is the knowledge graph behind the ontology encoding. For study 2, even though it is retinopathy due to diabetes mellitus, but if you look at the knowledge graph, retinopathy due to diabetes mellitus is a retinopathy due to diabetes mellitus and is a retinal disorder. So when you query for retinal disorder, it can automatically look up for the concepts within this hierarchy and then pull this particular study 2. And similarly for study 3, the disorder of macula is a retinopathy of diabetes mellitus, which is also a retinal disorder, and it can pull this particular study as well. All right. Okay. For the second question of retrieve all metabolic disorders, again, it can pull all 3 because type 1 diabetes mellitus is a metabolic disease, type 2 is also a metabolic disease, and metabolic syndrome is also a metabolic disease. Again, it is because that's how they are represented in the knowledge graph, and it can pull not by looking at the keyword searches, but it understands the meaning and it traverses the graph. As I mentioned before, there is an inferencing engine. It can traverse the graph and it can find the semantically it can pull. And similarly for retrieving all subjects in HMG-CoA reductase, because all of them are HMG-CoA reductases, so it can find all 3 studies. So in the summary, we saw FAIR data, knowledge graphs, governance, digital health delivery, and beneficiary. Or this is the pyramid or the FAIR, digital health framework. For FAIR data, we need metadata, standard data model, and ontology. In our case, we used our schema, metadata schema, and we used FIRE as data model, which is a de facto standard model now. And we use different ontologies. Even though if we use different ontologies, we had devised a mechanism. We can map them, harmonize them, even though they are using different ontologies. We can map them using the microservices that we developed. And once we have this is the fundamental stumbling block. And then we can, on top of that, we can go and deploy the learning systems, which is machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the governance layer is basically authentication, authorization, security, and scope. Who can access what? As in healthcare, it is very essential to maintain the privacy of patients. So if you are your patient may be visiting a hospital, but the attending physician will be different. So not every physician should have access to the patient's records. So this is where the governance layer comes into, and this can gate who can access it, and and then the technology. This has been well developed. We have all the technology tools and devices to enable this. And finally, it can reach the people, population, practitioner, providers, and governments. So we are fortunate that we just concluded our CLOVAC 1 just last month, and we have been extended for our funding for this year as well. The second step is to deploy the learning systems. So here in this case, we are trying to develop phenotype-phenotype characterization. I'll talk just briefly about what is phenotype-phenotype characterization. So there are several diseases. They're called spectral disorders, like asthma, autism, Alzheimer's, and so many. Until now, asthma is considered as a single disease, and people are treating asthma. So that resulted in very suboptimal. For some people, the treatment works. For some people, it is really difficult. They could not manage with the same drugs and things like that. The reason behind that is asthma is a spectral disorder. It's not a one particular disease. It's a heterogeneous phenotype, meaning it has different types of asthma. Unfortunately, we have all been treating asthma as a one single entity, and that is why we're not getting a proper desired results. And this heterogeneity is due to different etiology factors that can trigger asthma, and also the complex disease process itself makes it heterogeneous phenotype. So it is very important to identify and stratify these phenotypes based on what is their underlying mechanism, or that is called as an endotype. An endotype is nothing but an underlying mechanism of a phenotype is called as an endotype. So we need to identify these phenotypes and what is the underlying endotype. And then if we target the treatment, then it will be effective. So that we can enable diagnostic and therapeutic biomarkers, can monitor that, we can identify the people for treatment selection and prognosis. And that is the thing that we are aiming for, the second phase, which is deploying the learning system. So we are planning to develop the CLOVAC knowledge graph and instantiate that with the subject level data that can automatically identify patient phenotype and the endotypes. That's where we are. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for an excellent explanation, sir. You have explained in detail about metadata, ontology with case studies and all those. It was really interesting, sir. We have only two basic questions, sir. One is, how can we minimize unauthorized exchanges, hacks, and robbery of confidential data?
Yeah, so that is where the governance layer comes into. There are established security protocols. You can have blockchain technology that you can implement. That's the whole idea of the governance layer. It's a layer within the hierarchy where you can scope a person who can access, what they can access, and they have to access with authorization. And you can, of course, you can have the distributed computing system with the blockchain and things. You can minimize, hacking or people holding hostage of your data.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Second question is there any clinical guidelines for application of digital health in clinical practice and medical education? Sir? Do we have any clinical guidelines?
Clinical relevance?
Clinical guidelines, sir, for application of this digital framework, sir?
I can certainly look up and pass it on to you. Yeah, I don't have it, right away, but certainly there would be, and I can find it and pass it on to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again, sir, for accepting our invitation. Very short period, and it was really interesting, sir. And I would want to Ramya, sir. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for explaining us the basic technologies behind the digital health, which is grown across the globe in recent times. It was really a knowledgeable presentation about the data storage of patients' details according to the disease categories in digital health systems, sir. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the institution Sri Balaji Dental College and Hospital, Dr. Sumati Jones ma'am, Head of the Department of Pharmacology, for conducting the series of webinar on DENTOPHARM, Principal Dr. Jimson sir and Organizing Committee Dr. Satish and NP Murli. A special thanks to Dr. Nishat Sheikh and Angelin from DocMode for organizing the technical support. Thank you so much. And I also thank the participants for participating in the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.